This will be a talk about the art of herding cats. And while, yes, there will be a few cat pics, I'm sorry, this will be about two-legged cats. Us. People who are actually paid to think for themselves and how we make them think and make ourselves think. I'm Monika Orski. I'm a freelancing consultant. As you probably hear from my accent, I'm Swedish. I'm from Stockholm, where I'm currently, spend most of my time being the CTO of a small finance company. I'm also a hobby writer, a published writer of fiction and non-fiction. One of the non-fiction books is this one in Swedish, about the art of herding cats. And this book and a lot of things I say here are based on my experience as chair of Mensa Sweden for 4 years, but also a long, Mensa volunteering career, of course combined with my IT experience. I'm an engineer myself. One thing you learn when volunteering is that, in addition to making people do things, you have to actually make them want to do the things, because they are volunteers too. They can walk away, they don't get paid. The only thing they actually get is the satisfaction of getting things done. And of course in Mensa, they also get lots of complaints from people who are not volunteering, but will tell the volunteers how to do their volunteer work. Because unfortunately, that's one of the things that happen when lots of people like to think about things. There is always more than one solution to any program, as we know. Everyone in the software industry knows that. And some people tend to want to push their solutions, which leads to the saying that herding Mensans is like herding cats. I learned I have not made this up. Unfortunately, I can't claim that. I heard it, I think, the first time in a large international Mensa meeting back in 1996. I will not talk a lot about Mensa, but I put this thing up here. Well, this is the kind of test you take to prove that you're among the top 2% IQ-wise, and then you can join Mensa. You're welcome to do so. And also on the Nordic basis, now we have a foundation called the Nordic Mensa Fund, when we help finance research into intelligence and how intelligence is used in a very broad meaning. Please do give us money. So what intelligence, I say? I talk about intelligence, I'll talk about thinking. You can actually just steal the Wikipedia definition. It's a pretty good one. It's fairly much what people who know these things agree on. You also talk about giftedness or talent, or sometimes the G factor or general factor that is supposed to be something, a common factor to all the ways intelligence will manifest itself in people, in understanding, in being able to learn things fast, in interfering things from not quite enough information, and so on. The G factor is quite interesting, or as the international head psychologist of Mensa International puts it, there are good news about the G factor. It's that we are getting very good, or the psychologists are getting very good at measuring it. And there are bad news about the G factor. It probably doesn't exist anyway. It's just the abstraction. So we have to see, but still there is something we can measure, something we call intelligence. And we do know that there are lots of statistics about things. We do know that intelligence actually correlates with some really nice things, like longevity, health, income, career, social skills. This one is actually important. Unfortunately, there's a myth out there that this would be an inverse correlation. That is not true. More intelligent people tend to have better social skills than less intelligent people on a statistics basis. Of course, you can find a highly intelligent total asshole. Yes, I know more than one, I promise. And you can find some wonderful people that unfortunately have some real trouble making a connection between two things that are obvious to most of us, the rest of us. Yes, this is statistics. But still, the statistics say that, well, this is highly desirable, and it's not strange to see a lot of intelligence in an industry like software industry. Because yes, we need those skills. We need to be able to think fast, to learn new things, and to use our creativity in different ways, of course. There's also some other correlations that might be hard to explain, but they are there. There is a correlation between high intelligence and being nearsighted, which is kind of funny. There is also a statistical correlation between high intelligence and being tall. So if you look at me, you can see it's only statistics. So, and still saying it's only statistics, well, the gifted or the highly intelligent tend to think fast, to infer for information, to learn new skills a lot, and like variation. Variation is important here, because when you're full of ideas and you have varying ideas, you get what one of my fellow Mensons, actually another previous chair of Mensa Sweden, calls the restless brain. You know, like some people have restless legs. It's very hard to sit down without moving your legs. Well, many of us probably have restless brains. It's very hard to sit down for a long time not using your brain. It's not really relaxing most of the time. Sometimes it is. Which leads me to that intelligent people in the workforce or as volunteers will need a lot of stimulus. And this sounds rather trivial, but how do we achieve this? What do we do to make sure that people can use their restless brains in good ways? We might need to think about that, well, these people with high intelligence tend to want to see the whole picture, not only small details. Again, this is statistics. Some people really like to get into the nitty-gritty and are perfectly happy if someone else tells them that, yes, this part will be important and you can concentrate on that only and never mind the whole. But most people don't like that. Another thing is, of course, we're cats. We don't like hierarchies. It is impossible to herd cats, but you can lure them. Cats like new things, especially new shiny things. That's good. That's something to use. And cats are always curious. That goes for most two-legged cats too. Of course, people who think a lot will have many ideas. And especially when handling volunteers, thinking back to my Mensa experience, it's also important to know that some have the ideas and some have actually the will to also make the ideas happen. And of course, when handling volunteers, I learned very quickly, even before getting to be chair of Mensa Sweden, that you have to be really evil about this and tell people that, yes, okay, you have an idea. If you want to make your idea happen, tell me about your idea and we'll see if we can find people who will help you to make this happen. If you have an idea that someone else should make happen, sorry, someone else is busy making their own ideas happen, not yours. And in a way, try to use this in my software teams too, that yes, you have a great idea that you want to work on, convince us. Tell me and tell the team, and let's see if together you convince me that this is something you should get working on. If you have a great idea about what someone else should do, well, probably not. It might still be interesting, of course, depends on what it is, but most of the time, nah, don't think so. Because sometimes when you're supposed to think, when you are actually being paid to think, of course, there is the thing about what are you thinking about? What are the expectations? What do you expect? What do you expect of yourselves, of others, and from the workspace you're in? This will, of course, differ, and it will differ at different stages of the working life for every one of us. We expect some things when we're fresh out of university or training. We expect other things when we're middle-aged, and we expect still other things when we are really experienced and kind of looking to, well, how do I get this nice slope down for a good retirement here? So those are important questions, and it's important, I think, to all of us to ask them of ourselves and to make sure that people around us also ask them, and of course tell us, especially if you're managing a team. Have people tell you about their expectations, and not only expectations of themselves. And people tend to mirror you, to want to see, well, what do you expect from me? Okay, do I feel that that's okay to expect from me? Good, and that's what I will expect from me too, and so on. Which of course is needed, but also ask them what they expect from others, from the workplace, from the people around them, not only from you if you're the manager, but from everyone around. Another thing about, well, especially about intelligent people, is that self-image can be a bit varied. Sometimes, of course, we have this situation. And it's not that easy to explain that, yes, you're a very good cat, but you're not a lion. But sometimes we actually have the opposite situation, that you have someone who is doing really great already and probably has even more potential, but they see themselves as this small house cat that can do everyday chores, and that's about it. And then you have to convince them to maybe not start telling them they are a lion. They will not believe you. They will tell you they will think you try to flatter them, and they will wonder why. Is it because you don't want to give them a raise? You want to make them feel good about the job for other reasons, or what is this? But maybe you can at least convince them that they are a slightly bigger cat and start growing from there. So it's one of the things I think I've learned, and also when working with volunteers that came from all parts of life, that, well, you need to see both things here, both possibilities. Because after all, when we want people to know the expectations and have more or less the right expectations, whatever they are, what we really want is to allow efficiency. Because people can do great work, but if they're not working at the right thing, it's still not very good for the company they work at. Or as one really brilliant engineer I worked with put it, it's very good work, but it's totally worthless. And yes, so we don't want that to happen. We want to have the right level of challenge and also the right kind of restriction, the framework for the constraints when engineering. So we need to make this clear. We need to have clear boundaries. We need to know the overall level, but also, at least as important, for everyone to know what is their task. What are they supposed to do? And of course, we also need to present this and to explain things right way, which will be a bit individual. One thing that's observed as talking to highly intelligent people, and I would say right after that goes for talking to software engineers, is that, well, when you explain things, you might want to do it in a bit out of order for the average explanation. Let me put it like this. If someone starts explaining how to do something, use a new program or whatever, and they start by, yes, first you press this button to do this, and then you press this button to do this, and so on. That is wrong for everyone. Because the first thing you need to tell them is, of course, what is the goal here? What are we working at? Are you trying to file a time report, or are you trying to write a novel, or whatever? What are you trying to do? And in the general case, the instruction would be you tell what the overall goal is, and then you start at the start with, well, step 1, step 2, step 3, and so on, and you explain that. When talking to someone of high intelligence, and as I said, this goes for talking to software engineers, you probably want to tell a little more about that end goal. Not just, well, this is what we want to do, but also on a general level, how we want to achieve this. We want to write this novel in so and so many chapters by starting with the main story and then working on the characters and blah, blah, blah. And then we go to the step 1, step 2, and so on. Because that, for some reason, seems to be more effective with highly intelligent people. Tell it that way. And while we think about this, and we need to know the different levels, we also, of course, need to remember that it's about interactions, it's about communications. There are all kinds of people among software engineers, about highly intelligent people. We have different communication styles, and of course, some people want to really get into the flow, while others need frequent and shorter breaks, whatever. As long as people can work effectively, and as long as we remember and remind ourselves and people around us that you're ready for the next task after your rest. You do something, you rest a bit, 5 minutes or 5 days, depending on what you just finished, but you rest a bit, and then you're ready for the next task. Also important, stole a very good book title here, Robert Sutton, The No Asshole Rule. It's actually also a very good book about interactions in the working place, and it's important. It's especially important when people get very aware of being high intelligent and high performers, and you start thinking that, well, this person is so important to the company, the team, whatever, they can get away with anything. No, they can't, because that destroys the team around them. And it's always important to remember this and to know that, no, you can't. I mean, everyone can have a bad day. That's not definitely not what I'm saying. But if someone is acting, well, out of place more or less all the time, the loss is to keep them. It's not to get rid of them. And of course, the best scenario is if you can hinder this at the early level to make people not act as assholes. Even better. That's part of the usual rules of leadership, but of course are still highly valid. They have not somehow disappeared because you're handling highly intelligent people. If it's about paid work, well, you pay people and pay them reasonably. You treat people well, you treat people like people. All the usual things, like you criticize in private, but in general, most people like to be praised in public, but not everyone does that, likes that. So there's a need to know who wants public pat on the shoulder and who wants a private word that, yeah, good work. While symbolical rewards can never ever kind of be something you give people instead of a reasonable pay, it definitely helps. And it was very clear when working with volunteers, while I was chairman of Sweden, the board decided that all are like 40 plus volunteers who have worked during the year. Some have put in maybe 1 hour per week, but some have put in like 10 hours per week for a full year. Everyone, we send them a small reward. Everyone gets a voucher for 2 cinema tickets and a nice letter, actually hand-signed by the chair. I regretted that when I had to sign the 40 letters, but it worked out. Say that the board really appreciates the work and so on. And people were so happy. It's not like 2 cinema tickets, it's nothing. Even for those who worked 1 hour per week, it's absolutely nothing. And definitely not for those who work 10 hours per week. But they were happy because they were seen. Because someone told them, yes, this is good, you made really good. That's something that works. Another thing that works, and that works very well, I actually learned first time I tried to be a team leader, it's a development project, is that leadership by sugar works very well. You give people sugar. Hey, I've got some sugar here. I got some sugar, I was happy. And it works. It does. You put, and of course, in a way, this is something we probably all know and we all have seen. Think of that long meeting where people who are usually quite reasonable and can work well together are really getting at each other's throats, not because they really, really disagree on something important, but because they have been in a meeting for 2 hours and it's late and they're so damn tired. Okay, so if you have that kind of meeting, well, the best thing, of course, is not to have them, but the second best thing is to say, okay, let's have a break. Everyone go get some coffee or tea or water, and then if you're in a management position, you send a runner, or otherwise you run yourself if you're a team lead or something, and you go buy some candy and some fruit and put it on the table. And suddenly the meeting is back on track after 10 minutes. It works. And this also works for general, sit down with the team, we have a problem, we need to talk this through. Well, if you're in the same room, bring some chocolates. It will be so much easier that way. When doing this, we also, we talk about team. I heard some great talks earlier about how teams change. And of course, people change over time too. We all want development. We all need to build and rebuild. Because thinking humans will not want to stay in the same place for very long. Of course, everyone, most at least, have periods in their life when it's very nice to do something they already know and can keep doing. But thinking people tend not to want to do that their full career. They don't want to stay put. So we need to do something about that. We need to do something about the possible stress of that. Because, of course, when I talk about stress, there is the really, really unhealthy kind. Unclear tasks, no priorities, constantly changing expectations. That is deadly, and if you're in that situation, just run. If you see someone in that situation, corner them, sit them down, and tell them, you can't do this. Get out of this job. It's impossible. But that is not what I'm talking about here. There are 2 other kinds of stress that are not in themselves dangerous unless you get too big a dose of them, too large a dose of it. It's to have too much work. It happens to us that, there is this horrible week or this horrible month. And if it's not constant, that's perfectly okay. And sometimes you're bored. Maybe it's not enough work or just not the right kind of work. I mean, we all have brains, and well, is there someone in here who has never been bored in their life? I always wonder, when will someone raise their hand? And then I will wonder for the rest of my speech, will I dare ask the same thing at the end of it? But it's still... But yes, boredom is a natural part of life, it's a natural part of work, but if we get too much boredom, well, we want to get out of there. Because what's the point of if you're bored all the time? So we need to find some countermeasures. And of course, those of you who know Swedish children's literature know Pippi Långstrump, or Pippi Långstocking in English, who, among other things, said the very good thing that I've never tried that before, so I definitely can't do it. And that is a very good way of handling boredom, doing new things. If we want to keep our thinkers in the organization, we need to encourage that. We need to encourage the Pippi disposition. Give variation, let people try new things, learn new skills, and also remember that talented people tend to have multiple talents. Unfortunately, the world is very unfair that way. People of high intelligence are usually not just good at one thing. They have multiple talents, they can learn new things and get really good at those too. So you need to let people do that if you want to keep them inside your organizations. It could be about switching what they do, or doing something entirely new, or just learning something else, or doing things in new ways after a while. I think I've seen some large companies who are actually very good at keeping their engineers, especially the younger engineers that get into there, and you would think they would leave within a few years to do something else, but no. They move around the company and they stay in different roles, evolving within the company. And I've seen other large companies that definitely have an organization large enough to be able to do this, but seem not to do it. And when you see a young software engineer coming in there, you say, yeah, that's probably a good first job, and they will be out of it within 3 years, and yes, they are. So that's one other important thing. Let people actually develop their multiple talents. And when we do, of course, we will make mistakes. That's also part of the human brain. And sometimes we kind of get stuck in our mistakes, like I expect you, probably most of you read XKCD. I like it very much. And yes, this resonates, doesn't it? With kind of getting into mistakes. So, of course, sometimes we need to remember and tell each other and tell our teams who are leading them that, well, good enough is good enough. You don't have to fix everything. But we also have to remember that, well, only those who do absolutely nothing make no mistakes. That's probably part of why you see all those angry internet trolls who absolutely make no mistakes at all, because they just sit being angry internet trolls all day round. They never do anything. But it's also good for an organization if you kind of try to step out of this, that a mistake is an acceptable loss of prestige. I mean, of course, if it's not an acceptable loss of prestige, your organization is really in trouble. But I would say try to step out of that and say, no, it's not even an acceptable loss of prestige. It's a normal part of work. It's not a loss. Because sometimes smart people do stupid things. Unfortunately, that's quite normal too. Or we have a saying in Swedish that sometimes we are just out of luck when we're thinking. So I kind of collect stories about Mensens who do really stupid things, like forget the lights on or forget the lights off or whatever. One wonderful story about someone who was going to actually an exhibition of her beautiful four-legged cats. She was on a train, she got the cat carrier and her luggage and everything on, and it was really heavy and so. And then she got off the train an hour later, and it was so much easier. So she ran back into the train to get her cats for the exhibition. That is kind of things that people do, or trying to force something with a hammer and then realizing that the thing they tried to force with the hammer was actually made out of glass. Can imagine what happens to that? Not good at all. When people do that, I tell them that, well, they can think about a former Mensa chair who once, when there was this, had been pre-pandemic, a large Swedish Mensa meeting that unfortunately ended with a not very nice incident with the meeting, with the conference hotel we were at. It was a meeting of about 400 people, but maybe 20 of them could not behave. They behaved so badly to the hotel staff that those had to call the police. And some of them were climbing out roofs and things, so luckily no one managed to kill themselves being stupid, but some were pretty close. Okay, so that was one stupid thing, and then there was this Mensa chair who apologized at the hotel and did what you're supposed to do as a chair. You're kind of responsible, so you tell people about, try and act on behalf of your organization and smooth things down. And went fine with the hotel and so on. And then I did something really, really stupid. I went to my keyboard and I wrote something into a closed Facebook group intended for this meeting. Stays, of course, not pointing to anyone in particular, not mentioning names, but basically saying what had happened. And yes, your chair is really, really, really angry. Within 20 minutes, this was on the website of the local newspaper, of course, which I should have understood. That was absolutely an extremely stupid thing to do. I think I was a bit more understandable in not understanding that national papers would take it up, but yeah, it was summer, it was slow season. I was quite surprised when I learned from Australian friends that their papers had taken it up. That was a bit of a surprise. But yes, so I tell people that, well, when you do something stupid, you can think of me at that point. That's a good thing to do. So, in conclusion, are there some simple rules to lead and work with intelligent people? No, of course not. Of course, they're not simple. But I did bring the Cheshire cat, and there are some things we could try just to remember. Remember, you know enough to be able to admit you don't know everything. It's basic rule of management, I say, and especially when managing intelligent people. You need to deserve your authority if you're to have it, and the whole is more important than your small part, even your large part. It's more. You need to see whatever you're building at the whole. That is, if you're in the management position or a leadership position of any kind, that is part of your job to actually realize that. And I must say, as a freelancing consultant, I have seen some very large companies with, especially middle management, tend not to see this, which always surprises me. Or looking to what is my little realm instead of, well, but we're doing this as part of working for this company that has these goals. Or if you're just to retain one thing from this, I would like you to retain this. Remember about the countermeasures to boredom. Remember that brains need to have fun, and they need some sugar too. So I say thank you there. And of course, for those of you who read Swedish, I want to recommend my book about the time as Mensa chair and some of the things I've mentioned here. I'll be around to talk for a while. Thank you.